complicated. Okay, so it's my pleasure to be here this afternoon, and so we're moving from China all the way down to South Africa, and I think this is going to be probably the only presentation and discussion of how we teach health economics in Africa. In fact, I would say that University of Cape Town, where I'm based, is the first institution that developed teaching and health economics programs over the last 20-25 years. So before I move on and talk about our postgraduate diploma in health economics program, I'd like to talk a little bit about how we teach health economics and what kind of programs we have in Cape Town. So, as I mentioned, around 20 years ago or so, we started our first ever Masters in Health Economics on the African continent. And that program was part of the School of Economics, which is based at the Faculty of Commerce at the University of Cape Town. I happen to be the first graduate from that program. I'm proud of that, and it really was a good starting point. And health economics then was becoming increasingly important, not just worldwide, but in low and middle income country like South Africa. And we were involved in that program for a number of years. However, there was a more demand for that kind of program from the healthcare professional side as opposed to the economics graduates. So we decided to join our forces with the School of Public Health and Family Medicine, which is based at the Faculty of Health Sciences. And we designed a new program, which is Masters in Public Health, specializing in health economics. This program now has, I think, 8 different tracks, one of which is health economics. And we have developed and evolved quite dramatically, I would say, since our start in the year 2000. We've graduated more than 250 master's students. And I think since that time, another master's in health economics got established, I think, in Nigeria. But we're still very much proud, and I think we attract a lot of international as well as local students to our master's program. We also have a PhD program in health economics, so we train in particular health professionals, doctors, in health economics, and we're quite involved in supervising those PhD students. However, a lot of employees, both in the public and the private sectors in South Africa, have over many years expressed an interest in studying health economics, to not necessarily for them to be their kind of academic trajectory, but more importantly to help them in their workplaces. However, most of those would be based elsewhere, not in Cape Town, and our master's program is obviously a classroom-based program, and therefore they couldn't come to Cape Town, take a long time away from work. So we decided to think of, to join the world in that way as well, and develop our first online postgraduate diploma in health economics. So this is now the topic of my presentation. So in 2007, using the grant from SIDA, the Swedish International Development Agency, we started with our postgraduate diploma in health economics. And I don't know how many of you will remember the late Professor Gavin Mooney, particularly those of you from Australia would remember him. And I speak of him with tears in my eyes because he was our friend and our colleague for many years. And he, in fact, gave us a gift. He approached us and said, well, here we go. I know you're thinking of developing a postgraduate diploma in health economics, which would be an online program, but I'm happy to collaborate with you. And so with his help, we kind of took over what he was involved in at the time, I think in Sydney. And with this particular grant, which was quite, again, very generous gift from SIDA, we introduced our first diploma in health economics. And as somebody earlier today mentioned that online programs are very time-consuming. They actually do take a lot of our time in terms of our teaching efforts, and they take our time away from our other responsibilities on different other programs. So it's not really just a kind of cost saving for the faculty, but it's obviously an inevitable program that we need to offer because there is a huge demand for it. So we decided to go with this particular program, and it was very generic. It was very it was very general in terms of that it covered very superficially everything about health economics, but nothing really deep enough. Which perhaps at the time was a good thing because it was a starting point, and particularly for those in employment who wanted to learn about health economics, which would then have the kinds of skills that would help them in their workplace. Rather than understand the concepts in much more depth. So basically I just want to mention a bit more about it. So the old program attracted quite a lot of local as well as international students. So it was designed to be an international program, and students were from South Africa, the rest of the African continent, Asia, and since 2007, when it was established, around 70 students graduated with a postgraduate diploma in health economics. We were very proud of it. We were happy to continue, but the CEDA funding ceased out, and we didn't have enough, I would say, perhaps not enough willingness to continue teaching using our own resources, which were not covered by the faculty. So now this is going into the realm of something else, which is how teaching health economics is financed worldwide. Well, this is in this case how it's being managed in South Africa. So in a major university like University of Cape Town, a lot of research is done through soft funds, as you know, and research entities are established if there is good funding available, and then research units or institutes get built around that. And in the past, even during this first diploma that we offered then, we subsidized a lot of our teaching. So in other words, those of us in permanent employment paid by the university to teach were teaching something that was very important at the time, but most of the teaching faculty was not employed by the university. I'm not sure if that is the case in the other parts of the world, but permanent positions or tenures are very few these days. So we decided to stop with the diploma because the university wouldn't give us more posts in health economics. Although health economics was really becoming an important discipline. So our negotiations with the faculty didn't really work out. The faculty didn't give us more permanent posts in health economics, and we decided to stop offering this program. So this is a little bit about the background of it. And it's maybe politics, maybe it's really just how the programs are financed these days. And that is a big issue in South Africa, where there are a few very large universities, and there are issues with who will fund those universities in the future. So the background is there. We decided not to continue with this program without being offered a post. So now I'm going to talk about how the diploma was revised and the content of the new diploma, but this is the background that was very important to us. We would not have stopped offering this diploma because it really was a successful program if it wasn't for the fact that we were subsidizing the University of Cape Town. So what happened then, we continued with our negotiations with the faculty, and we were given 2 posts. And we decided, okay, fantastic, now we have some good funding, and good starting point for us to think a bit more about this diploma. Is it still relevant? Do we want to change it? In what way? So we had a lot of brainstorming sessions, and after a while we decided to design a totally new curriculum. And this new curriculum was in light of the health sector reforms taking place in South Africa. And they mainly relate to the national health insurance that is being currently proposed. Well, it's been proposed for now more than a decade, but it still hasn't taken off the ground. The national health insurance is something that we're still debating in South Africa, and we're hoping that in the near future we will be able to talk about maybe some good experiences from that kind of financing side of the story. So the context is the national health insurance is being slowly introduced in South Africa. And for the majority of the employees, particularly in the ministries of health and as well as in the private sector, there is a need to think about how the skills will be created and built so that on both public and the private sector side, the individuals involved in the national health insurance issues will be able to know how to buy and provide services. So if you remember in 2010, the World Health Report emphasized that raising sufficient money for health is imperative, but just having the money will not ensure universal coverage, and universal coverage being really the buzzword these days in low and middle-income countries. Purchasing is the critical link between resources mobilized for universal coverage and the effective delivery of quality services. So another buzzword is strategic purchasing. So for the Ministry of Health to be able to purchase the services from either the district level authorities or the private sector, they need to be able to think strategically how to do it. And versus, for example, passive purchasing that we know is based on, I don't know, some predetermined budgets or just paying the bills as they're presented. So the government officials, as well as the private sector providers who are opposing this whole notion of the national health insurance, needed to be kind of trained in how to do it. So the South African officials have decided that their purchasing will be the strategic way of buying services from the private sector in particular. Therefore, the capacity needed to be built in that area. So the national health insurance is the backdrop, and the fact that to achieve the universal coverage in South Africa, the skills in strategic purchasing needed to be developed. Okay, so these are all these things that were happening in South Africa at the time, and it gave us some, a few years to think about how we should revise our postgraduate diploma in health economics. So the key emphasis of our diploma is economic evaluation and strategic purchasing. So these will be the two pillars of our postgraduate diploma in health economics. Not just what is health economics and the demand and the supply things and financing of healthcare services and this and that. It's really just these two specific areas. And that is because economic evaluation is a skill that is required to inform the range of services which can be provided within the constraints of available financial resources. It is required in order for us to be able to determine the most cost-effective diagnostic and treatment interventions, and finally to assess whether or not to adopt new technologies. So these are the very specific questions that those who will be the key decision makers in this national health insurance scheme will need to have. They will need to have the skills of not necessarily performing these cost-effectiveness analyses themselves, but more importantly to understand and to be able to interpret published studies. And other skills, in addition to economic evaluation, would be contracting with private providers, how to do it, monitoring quality of care so that the services are provided at a certain level of care, quality of care, introducing and managing provide payment mechanisms and what kind of incentives or disincentives these mechanisms can create, and finally establishing effective governance mechanisms. So these are the skills that we hope those who sign up with us to do this program will exit with and be able to implement them in their workplace. So it's not just your generic health economics 1, health economics 2. It is a very specific set of skills. So in 2015, so it gave us a few years to think of the new focus for our diploma. A decision was made to redesign this program with this particular focus on strategic purchasing and economic evaluation. The program's relevancy to South Africa is heightened further by the participation of only local participants from the public and private sectors. I think you were talking about visa issues and how it's, for different reasons, targeting the local students. In our case, we want to develop the capacity of the South African officials or decision makers. Whilst the diploma is open, obviously, to international students, we actually have a preference for the local students. And why not? We're not coy about it, and we just think that at this time in history in South Africa, there is a huge need for capacity development, particularly in the healthcare sector. So, and there is a lot of transformation agenda, where there is a need to obviously upgrade the skills of a lot of decision makers in the government sector in particular. So yeah, so all our students are South Africans. So a little bit about the new curriculum. So the postgraduate diploma in health economics has 8 modules. I'll go through them separately and individually. So the first module is Introduction to Health Economics. And before I continue with this, the target audience is healthcare professionals, government officials, private sector practitioners, and so on, with 3-year level tertiary education. No specific background is required. Could be clinical, could be economics, could be any other social science background. So that's the audience. But the modules are as follows. So the first one is the introduction to health economics, with an aim to give students an introduction to the scope and content of the subdiscipline of health economics, and to explain the reasons why healthcare differs from other commodities and the basis of market value in healthcare. So for us, it's important really to distinguish between what health economics is and what economic evaluation is. Economic evaluation is a further subdiscipline of health economics. It should never be mixed, because they're two different concepts. Then the module 2 provides the students with an understanding of health systems, different forms of organization and financing of healthcare services, and to introduce learners to the key elements of strategic purchasing. So there's a little bit of introduction into health economics and into health systems. Then module 3 focuses on the priority setting and healthcare decision making. And basically, the aim of this particular module is to provide an overview of the economic and other approaches to priority setting for healthcare decision making in terms of both efficiency and equity. And then module 4 aims to provide an understanding of the concepts, methods, and applications of economic evaluation and health-related interventions. So this particular module is quite hands-on module where students are asked to do a lot of case studies and to be able to understand how cost analysis, cost benefit, cost utility, cost effectiveness analysis are done. So this is quite a practical module. I would say a lot of application as opposed to theory. Then we move on to modules 5 and 6. So module 5 would be our last economic evaluation module. And here we aim to equip students with the skills to interpret cost effectiveness ratios and to critique published economic evaluation studies. Again, I repeat, it's a program designed for those in employment who need to not necessarily be able to do these studies, but to be able to understand and interpret. So imagine an private insurance company who needs to decide, for example, how to go about either reimbursing a drug or introducing a new healthcare technology, or a government official deciding who should they purchase services from in the private sector. So the understanding of how these things work will be probably very useful for them in the short run. Then the last or the remaining 3 modules are focusing on the strategic purchasing. The first one is has an aim to develop a detailed understanding of the key strategic purchasing actions in relation to both populations served and providers. Then the second strategic purchasing module is basically focusing on providers and how they can be influenced, looking at different provider payment mechanisms and what kind of incentives they can create. The last one is really wrapping it all up and focusing on strengthening progress to universal coverage. So I'll quickly go through these last few slides. The mode of learning is mixed, meaning it's an online program over 24 months on a part-time basis, where students can access all the material online. The system is called VULA, and the assignments are also submitted via that same platform. The students are given a tutor for each module. The tutor could be contacted any time during an email system or via VULA, this online system. And our experience is that the system works really well for us. In addition to this online component, where students could be based anywhere in South Africa, they are required to come to Cape Town, to the University of Cape Town, twice during their studying, in year 1 and year 2, for 2 weeks. And that's so-called contact week, where we spend 2 weeks teaching, discussing, doing case studies, answering any questions, and we also ask students to do the group presentation, for which they are also assessed. So the assessment is continuous. There is no final examination. So throughout these 2 years, students are required to do 2 assignments per module, which means 16 assignments in total. They get regular feedback from the tutors, and they also have a couple of assignments during the contact weeks. The demand for this type of learning, so postgraduate online, is huge. In 2015, we had 107 applicants from 49 were accepted. So that's quite a large number. In 2016, this number of applications rose to 123. We selected 52 applicants. Half of these students are government employees and with more than 8 years of experience. So that is our student audience. The question of affordability. These postgrad programs are not cheap, and it's not easy to get funding for them or scholarships. So we assume that because this is a program that targets those in employment, they'll be able to pay. And up to now, that was never a problem. Those in employment were able to pay their fees. And this is particularly important in the current climate in South Africa, where there are a lot of discussions about who should pay for the tertiary education. Our main challenge is how to marry the depth and the breadth of the course. At the moment, it's quite deep. It's very specializing. It's very niched. Perhaps in 10 years' time or 5 years' time, there will be different kinds of questions that will need to be answered in South Africa, so we will change our focus again. So that's the idea. So to summarize, the new and improved postgraduate diploma in health economics is a niche program that responds directly to the current questions being asked in South Africa. It's a platform that suits individuals in employment who have a need to gain these skills. This is a photograph from last year's Contact Week. And this is a link to the brochure. So if you need more information about the program or what we're doing at UCT, you can check that out. Thank you.
Any questions?
I was just thinking that 24 months is a long time for diploma. I would feel if I'm, even as a working executive, I'm going to spend 2 years. I better get a master's. And so have you had any feedback from those students about that length of time?
A good point. 24 months would involve perhaps 6 months of effective training. So it's over a 24 months period. The students are given a lot of breathing space in between, so that they're not bombarded with assignments all the time. So let's say the year will start in April, and they would have April, May to do some work, and then there will be break for 1 month or two, and then the second module starts. A question, they would like to get their diploma as soon as possible. But at the same time, the masters are not, the program that we offer, just the only masters that we have at the moment, is not available online. So they cannot leave their jobs for 2 years to be based elsewhere. So, I mean, it's never a perfect situation, but there is a demand for it.
You focus your program quite specifically as you described it. Don't you see any risk in doing that and not giving a more general overview at least, because the question may change over time and then you have to redo things and you have educated already and not the knowledge which may be necessary within 5 to 10 years.
Sure. So the first 2 modules are very general. So the introduction to health economics, the introduction to health systems, will give the students the general foundation or the good foundation to understand really what health economics and health systems issues are all about. So we will probably continue with those 2 modules in the future if we ever change the focus of the diploma. Economic evaluation is probably for us, it still will be one of the key, in addition to the financing of healthcare services, the key area of health economics. So there they'll again get a very good foundation. What's probably missing is the general financing stuff, but we believe that strategic purchasing and issues around that answer the question of financing. The time will show whether we're right or wrong. Those who are trained now will probably be, hopefully, using their skills over the next 10 years whilst the national health insurance is taking off. Then they will get old and maybe move on in any case. And then we will think of what is still relevant in South Africa in 5 years' time. And if it's something else, then we will tweak it. But it's always based on the sound health economics principles, the theories. It's not really, we teach a lot of theory. It's not just your case studies. And so we are taking a risk, but we're quite confident that it's a good way to go this time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.